Hello YouTube, it's Ian here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we're going to do another manga review. Today we're going to be finishing up all of the manga reviews I have left over from last month, and we're going to be looking at Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2, Battle Tendencies. Now this is written by Hirohiko Araki, published by Viz Media. I personally read it on the Shonen Jump app, but there are these Jojonium hardcover editions, which are basically the same thing as the Fist of the North Star Kanzenban editions, but they're like specially made specifically for Jojo's. However, the Jojoniums were retired after the third one, so Viz had to find a new way to make these like collector editions of these books, and so they kind of stopped looking similar after the end of part 3 and the beginning of part 4. So I'm not going to buy them physically. If I ever do buy them physically, I'll probably buy them from Spain or from Mexico, because they're actually like planned out to look all the same except for different colors. And I personally like that a lot more than having like one style for the first 3 and then individual styles for each one after that. So, that doesn't really matter, but there you go. I read it on the Shonen Jump app because I don't want to buy them physically. The demographic was shown at one point, and then it transitioned over to seinen because the magazine switched. It's still under Shueisha, but it's a different magazine because I don't know, the manga wanted to do something a little bit more adult, or because the things that they wanted to put on Shonen Jump were slightly different from what Bizarre Adventure was, providing. So I don't know. I just know that it switched. So it was a shonen and now it's a seinen, and it's been a seinen for however long it's been going on now. The genres are adventure, fantasy, and supernatural. I would also call it urban fantasy instead of just purely fantasy. I think it kind of fits more. Adaptations wise, it does have an anime. I think the anime that was available on Netflix covers this part as well as the next one, and then after that there are like individual seasons called specific things to match whatever part the story is going with. And the premise here is basically that between the years 1938 and 1939, right before the start of World War II, or right during the time of World War II, but before the US joined it, Joseph Joestar, grandson of Jonathan Joestar, the original character from part 1, has to use his innate Hamon abilities, his like special sunlight key energy thing, to battle these pillar men, which are these like superhuman Neanderthal guys, who are the creators of the Stone Mask. And we get to see his adventure throughout this year as he, does this stuff, right? So there you go. Now, I just want to say this is way better than part 1. I'm not the type of person that would ever say skip a part of a story, because I think that's stupid. I don't know how to word this argument, but basically I think skipping parts is stupid. It's not good because you don't actually have the whole idea of the story. Whether you call yourself a fan, I guess, is dependent on you as an individual. So it's pretty good. I liked it so much better than part 1. I don't think part 1 is skippable. I think you should definitely read part 1. Although I definitely recommend reading it instead of watching it, because I think it goes by faster, because you can read faster if you want to. You can't really like speed up the TV show. So there you go. Now let's look at the plot line here. I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty well done. It starts out with his introduction. We get to learn that Speedwagon is an old tycoon now. He's gone to the US and he's become very, very rich. My man is really living the life. And Jojo, in this case, Joseph Joestar, is, kind of grown up now. He's like an 18-year-old or something like that. And he ends up meeting up with Speedwagon, and then they go somewhere, and then they end up meeting Strazio, which is one of Zeppeli's old students or something like that, or one of Zeppeli's old friends. I can't remember, but he was like he showed up at some point in the end of part 1. I can't remember exactly how it happened. Who has now turned traitor because he has grown old, and as part of growing old, he has feared death, and so he has now become a vampire. And so Jojo has to fight him, and he kills him, and this doesn't really end up being all that important until very much near the end of the story, where there's this revelation, and you're like, oh shit. Although Strazio was such a like non-entity that I didn't really catch the twist until like 3 days after I read the book, and like the last book in the series, and I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of bad. But I think it's kind of interesting that, you know, there's this setup and then it doesn't really go anywhere, but it doesn't really matter. After they beat Strazio, they move on to Mexico. They go and enter the Nazis. It's a very weird kind of thing because this Nazi character that they meet happens to basically turn out to be a good guy. And that's a really weird kind of like thing. I mean, he's still a Nazi, but he's not like evil. Like, you know, in the US, most things, like making a bad guy a Nazi is like the easiest way to make him like uber evil, right? So this guy shows up, he's a Nazi, but he's not like uber evil. He's just like not aligned with our main characters for the most part. And then they learn about the Pillarmen because they accidentally awaken one of them. They awaken Santana, or Sant Viento in the English edition, because Santana is straight up just Santana's name, and you can't you can't have that. So they had to change his name to Sant Viento. Yeah, they fight him, and it ends up being a very interesting fight, and Sant Viento's powers are crazy. I really like that. I think the Pillarmen are great. And then they defeat him. They move on to Italy to train, because Jojo has Hamon, but he's never actually trained it because he just had innate ability. And Joseph Joestar also kind of hates working and trying and all of this type of stuff. So he had innate ability, but he didn't really have like foundational skills about how to use Hamon. And so they take him off to get trained by Lisa. Afterwards, they introduce Wamu, which is the best Pillarman. I love him so much. Wamu is hilarious. And he's also kind of like the best bad guy out of these four. They also meet AC/DC and Cars. Cars ends up being the major villain of the story, but I think Wamu is much better personally. I think he's more interesting. And then, you know, eventually they get through all of this stuff and they have this final battle in Switzerland, and it's pretty good. It's really great. I actually really enjoyed it. Overall, I think my problem with part one wasn't necessarily the plot line, because the plot line was like okay, but it was the characters and the character motivations, because most of it didn't make sense. So let's talk about the characters, and then we'll come back to this kind of point here, and I'll tell you why I like this part significantly better than part one. So the characters, we have Irina, which was Jonathan's wife. She survived at the end of part one, and she saved this little girl, and she also was pregnant with Joseph's father. We don't know his name, I don't remember his name. And then we have Strazio, again, he's from the original series, and Speedwagon, again, from the original part. And then we have Joseph Joestar. Again, this guy is funny and interesting. He kind of comes off as a dick and like a weirdo at first, but I think in general I actually quite like him by the end of the story. He has, you know, these like chivalric tendencies that, you know, Jonathan Joestar had. He also has this kind of interesting like mind reader thing that he does, which I enjoy. And he also happens to be kind of a scamp, and so I actually enjoy him as a character quite a bit. Then we have Caesar Cepelli, who I think was Cepelli's grandson, and he happens to be Joseph's friend. And, you know, Caesar was actually quite good. I actually liked him quite a bit as well. He comes off kind of shitty at first, but again, he grows on you. And then we have Lisa, who is a very great character. I actually like her a lot. I think her character design was great. I think her style was really good. She definitely had that kind of like old mentor type vibe going really well for her, but also she was quite attractive. So there you go. And then we have the four bad guys: Sant Viento, Wamu, AC/DC, and Cars. And out of the four, Wamu and Cars are probably the best. Sant Viento was pretty cool early on, but then he kind of became lame in comparison. And AC/DC really doesn't have much going for him. So there you go. Now, let's talk about why I like this part more than I like part one. Part one was basically really poorly made in terms of the characters. None of it makes sense because of how the story goes, right? So the bad guy is Dio in part one, and the reason he's a bad guy is because he's an asshole. There's no actual meaning behind anything he does, right? He wanted wealth and power, and he immediately got it, like in chapter 2, because, you know, Jojo's dad adopted him, and he already had wealth and power. So He just wanted more because he was an asshole, and he just wanted to torture Jojo. And then he learns about the mask, and he becomes a vampire, which gives him more power and more, influence and whatever. And so instead of, using that to leverage even more power by, taking over England or whatever, he takes over this tiny village in England that, he uses for some reason to terrorize Jojo, but it doesn't really do anything. And so I really dislike the events of the story, because they all led back to Dio, and Dio was just a bad character because there was nothing good about him. There was nothing meaningful or redeeming or useful as a bad guy from him. And so the story kind of fell flat because the bad guy fell flat, right? There was no reason why any of this needed to happen. So Dio was just a bad guy for reasons, and that's that, right? It's not good. That's why I didn't like the story, because the bad guy was bad, as in badly written, not as in bad morally. And so badly written bad guy equals badly written story, and I didn't really enjoy part 1. Part 2, however, kind of does away with that. They talk about the stone mask. They make the whole thing make sense within the lore of JoJo. However, these bad guys make a lot more sense. Okay, yes, the idea of these ancient Neanderthal superhumans makes no sense. But it doesn't have to, because Hamon doesn't make sense. This is the fantasy story first and foremost. It's fine. That's not really the issue. The character motivations, though, are actually relatively good compared to Dio at the very least, right? These guys want to be able to live better than they did before. They want to be able to walk in the sun, which is something they cannot do. And so they wanted to make this stone mask and then create this what's it called? This, development thing to further evolve them so they could now walk in the sun. That is a understandable reason to want to do something. And also, they basically ended up being bad guys because being superhuman, they held humans to a low regard. And so they treated humans as, we treat animals that we eat. And so that's where the major kind of conflict became. And then they continued to do this, right? And then they had this kind of a difference of opinion with the rest of their people. And so they kind of rebelled, killed all of them, and moved on, right? There's a lot of the stuff that they did makes sense within their own twisted logic. And that's so much better than Dio. And so I actually quite like them a lot because the bad guys in this part makes more sense. And it is, much better done. So there you go. That's why I like this part, and I don't like part 1. Now, the world building here is quite good. I really enjoy that everything comes back to the stone mask, and everything makes sense within the story. And it also feels like the story finishes up Hamon. This power system has reached its limit. There is no more use for it. And so that's why stands come in part 3. So I'm actually quite happy with it. I think everything was great. And of course, the Pillarmen are wild and very fun and very interesting. And I actually really like this idea of this ancient superhuman type thing. So there you go. Overall, the characters, plotline, and world building were great. The art is actually quite good. And, a lot of people say that early Jojo's is not that great. And I actually disagree. I think early Jojo's, within the sphere of what was happening around the time, is actually quite good. The art style in it is very well done. It's very enjoyable. It definitely beats out Saint Seiya. So, and Saint Seiya is something that I quite like. So I understand, that sometimes you can overcome these difficulties of having to look at bad art when you're reading. And I don't think that JoJo's is bad by any means. I actually think it's quite good. I really enjoy it. And I think it's very fun. It has a very interesting, crisp style. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. It just looks really odd. But also, it doesn't matter because it fits the characters in the story. I also really love the color pages in this story. There's a few of them that just looked gorgeous. Really, really amazing. In terms of fan service, I think there's a little bit of fan service here, mostly around Lisa because she's the only female character that shows up in the whole story, and there's some kind of quips about her and stuff like that. So if you don't like that type of stuff, kind of maybe don't read this. But they're so minimal; they happen 3 or 4 times across the whole story, so it really doesn't matter all that much. And yeah, in terms of rating, this is a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. Where I gave JoJo's Part 1 a 3 out of 5. Very generously now that I think about it. I think this one definitely earns a 4 out of 5. It almost could be a 5 out of 5, but I think that, it really should have been longer so that we could have AC/DC as well, instead of just kind of like beat him up really fast. I can't even remember what happened to him. So I think if they made that a little bit longer, they made, you know, the relationship between Jojo and Caesar Cepelli a little bit more interesting and more kind of meaningful, would have been great. But 4 out of 5, it's a great score. I really enjoyed it a lot. I actually think this is going to maintain itself as one of my favorite JoJo parts as I can continue reading, because I can't really see myself really enjoying anything more than I enjoyed this part. So yeah, that's it. I recommend this for sure. If you were unsure about part 1, definitely read part 2. It's really not that long. It's only 60 something chapters. It's a very easy read. I definitely recommend you check it out. And yeah, that's it for that. In terms of similar titles, well, I mean, Fist of the North Star and Saint Seiya are going to be more or less the most similar things that you can think of. They're also kind of from the same time period, so you're going to have an understanding of like the style of Shonen Jump at that time. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.